Hey, Cross Park, we started this new sermon series on Sunday talking about our identities. And we've said that our identity in our modern culture is a tricky thing. It's contested, it's a big issue. We're both told to generate and decide our own identities, but then these identities have to be plugged into some sort of group, and the status of those groups are very important. And this is tricky, it's very disorienting. When you take the fact of our identity politics, our identity challenge, and then you lay over top of that all of the events of 2020, it's very difficult to know how to make sense of it and how to move forward. And so all fall, we're going to be thinking together from different perspectives on this topic of how do we think about our identity. This Sunday, we're going to be talking about a particular group identity that the Bible gives us, and I'll show you in the sermon how it relates well to what we said last week. But the Bible wants God's people, us, to be a people of righteousness and justice. Well, what does that mean? Whose definition of righteousness and justice? What definitions are available to us? How does identity relate to justice? And how does justice relate to identity? These are all questions that we're going to try to answer and explore together on Sunday. But I also wanted to do it a little bit this week. So I'm using this video tonight to set you up a little bit for what's coming later in the week. First, I want to read to you a long quote from David Brooks. This article is an article that I have included in the emails, and I think in the email that this video came in, I think it'll be helpful to you. Let me read this long quote to you. The article was in the Atlantic this week called "America is Having a Moral Convulsion." David Brooks. People today live in what's called liquid modernity. All the traits that were once assigned to you by your community, you must now determine on your own. Your identity, your morality, your gender, your vocation, your purpose, and the place of your belonging. Self-creation becomes a major anxiety-inducing act of young adulthood. Further, in the age of social media, our sociometers, the antennae we use to measure how other people are seeing us, are up and on high alert all the time. Am I liked? Am I affirmed? Why do I feel invisible? We see ourselves and how we think others see us. Their snarkiness turns into my self-doubt. Their criticism into my shame. Their obliviousness into my humiliation, right? Sometimes it's worse to be ignored than to be hated. Danger is ever present. For many people, it is impossible to think without simultaneously thinking about what other people would think about what you're thinking, says Frederick de Boer. Let me say that again. For many people, it is impossible to think without simultaneously thinking about what other people would think about what you're thinking. This is exhausting and deeply unsatisfying. As long as your self-conception is tied to your perception of other people's conception of you, you will never be free to occupy a personality with confidence. You're always at the mercy of the next person's dim opinion of you and your whole deal. Long quote. But it helps to confirm what we were saying Sunday, that there's pressure to figure out who we are, that in the past, old cultural systems, traditional cultures would simply slot you in an identity, tell you who you were, and there wasn't much way out of that. And modernity, this liquid identity, was supposed to free us from all the oppressiveness and unpleasantness of that old system. But it's created other problems, right? So now we're not really sure who we are, we're not sure how to figure it out, and then we're constantly anxious about how everyone else feels about us. And of course, what we're saying is God has something much better for you. God gives us an identity. We have to believe it and inhabit it. And then our church community is designed to reinforce and help us remember what that identity is. In this case, for Sunday, we're saying that the identity God has for us is as people of righteousness and justice. Well, if that's an identity, then it must be very important to God. And it's got to be different than however our culture is going to define it. There will be overlap, but there are going to have to be differences. So, a couple things I want you to do. First, you already know this. I want you to realize that I am not an expert on identity and justice. You probably already know that. But I have been doing lots of reading and thinking about the topic for several weeks now, trying to get up to speed and to think and communicate as biblically as possible on this issue. This has been a challenging year for our culture, and so I want to think biblically together about how Bible categories might best interpret and overlay themselves on our cultural realities. I do see it as part of my job to help us all think this way together. So to that end, in this email, I have included links of articles that have been particularly helpful to me. It's a lot of content. I don't expect you to read it all, but of course, the more of it you read, the more context you will have for Sunday's sermon. Additionally, if you read a bunch of it, you'll recognize a lot of it in Sunday's sermon. So we're going to try to speak biblically and clearly on these topics, knowing that my speaking, of course, is always imperfect. Next, I do want to ask you to pray for me. This is a challenging topic to handle in some ways. People are all over the map on how we feel about it. We're likely to offend no matter what we say on this topic, and that's okay. But just pray for me. Pray that I'll be wise and be as biblical as possible. Because we're right in the middle of a current upheaval culturally, sometimes it's hard to have a settled understanding of what's going on, which makes it difficult to talk about. But I think it's important. So we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to ask you to pray for me. Lastly, I am going to send you another video, probably Thursday or Friday, a video coming from me. I'm going to have a number of different things in there. I'm going to also include a video that I watched that I found helpful that I think will give you some great context. But I can't fit everything into the sermon, and the more that I can give you now, the more it helps you heading into the sermon. So I'm going to, as I keep working all week on the sermon, I'm going to figure out what else I could say in the video that would be helpful to you. Now, this Sunday, there is a decent chance of rain currently. There's this tropical storm, hurricane actually, that's going to come up through Louisiana. And depending on exactly where it goes, we might get rained out Sunday morning. So in our video Friday, I'll give you a bit of an update on what's happening weather-wise. I mean, you can look at the weather as easily as I can, but I'll tell you how we're planning to make that decision and how we're planning to communicate that decision to you, whether or not we're going to meet in the parking lot for Sunday morning service. We want you to be deeply informed about God's designs for us as Christians, for our identity, so we can inhabit them and live them out. And part of what that's going to mean in our culture is that we want to be people who understand our identity so well that we can actually be ambassadors of reconciliation and that God can do his kingdom redemptive work even through us. So that's our goal in thinking about this topic, particularly this Sunday. Pray for me. I really look forward to being able to share this topic with you, whether it's digitally or in person. And as you pray for me, I'll be praying for wisdom, and we look forward to investigating and exploring this topic together. Cross Park, thanks for your time, and we'll see you soon. Take care.